Hello, gang. Tattooed Biker here with you, and tonight I've got 5 terrifying true stories and cryptid encounters from viewers just like you. But before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then do me a favor. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and then we'll grab your gear and let's ride to cryptid country. All right, first up tonight, a witness in rural Pennsylvania has a frightening cryptid sighting that haunts him to this day.
Dear Tattooed, in the winter of January 2019, I had an encounter with what I now believe was an upright canine. At the time, I had no idea what I was looking at, but I did know what it absolutely wasn't. Anyway, on to it. It was the first week of January. Here in rural Pennsylvania, it was stupid cold. The house I had was pretty close to a wooded area, and sometimes, critters would get into the garage. Raccoons, possums, and occasionally bears. They would rip the trash up, and I'd have a mess to clean up in the morning. Nothing really strange about it, just a real pain in the ass. On this night, now I can't remember if it was a Friday or a Saturday night, I hear something going for the cans. So I get up and look out a side window. Now this window looked out over my driveway, and you'd see the top of my car, but not necessarily the tires. This is important. So I'm trying to get a look towards my cans, and I see this dark, big animal down on all fours, just kind of sauntering down the driveway towards the road. It's got its head down, and it's kind of shuffling back and forth. I immediately think a bear. I move to the big picture window to get a better look. What walked out of my driveway and onto the road was no bear. This thing, it stood up, and on 2 legs it walked onto the road, still semi-hunched over. I stood there and literally pissed my pants. I have no words strong enough to describe the visceral feeling that seeing this thing inspired. It walked out onto the road and stood almost directly under a yellow streetlight. The next day I went out and measured the pole up to where it came to, and it was about 7 foot. The way this thing walked, it was tall and athletic. Think more center in basketball, not linebacker. The ears were tall and pointed. Its fingers were also long, very similar to raccoon hands. It was either black or dark gray. The yellow streetlight kind of threw off the color. I can't describe how much fear just seeing this thing brought up in me. It's the most god-awful creature because, it's just so wrong. Like it shouldn't be here. Shouldn't even exist. I stood there in that window, just watching this thing, horrified. It walked pretty casually across that road and appeared to kind of hunch down. At this point, I could also see its eyes, and they seemed to be a backlit blue. As in, they weren't normal animal eye shine. They appeared to be lit from within. I think it may have sat there in this big, ugly forsythia bush, looking directly at me. Now at this point, it's no more than 70 feet or so away from me, and still looking at me. I remember trying to sink down very slowly, below the windowsill, so maybe it couldn't see me. I did as much, and I peeked over the sill. I couldn't see it anymore in the bush, and I don't know if it was looking elsewhere or if it had moved away. I stayed there for quite some time, on my knees, just peeking out. I remember it getting very cold due to my wet pants, and I remember waiting in another room for my brother and sister to get home. I also remember that my brother's dog, who went absolutely batshit, if a squirrel so much as walked across our driveway, had slept through the whole thing. It didn't even budge. And he was the barkiest damn dog on the planet, but he was totally unbothered. I've had some time to reflect on how odd that was. I heard the garbage cans getting jostled, and it wasn't a subtle sound. And Lucas just kept snoring. It was weird. We eventually sold that house because, after this, bizarro shit kept happening. I refused to leave it after dark, and if I absolutely had to, I still wouldn't. I was just so afraid. This thing was 100% a monster, and it still makes me very uneasy to go out after dark even now. Another interesting thing, this wasn't in the remote boonies. The property is in Pennsylvania, about 6 miles or so from downtown Scranton. There were woods behind the house, and the neighborhood was a big cul-de-sac. It had one road in and one road out, and the back half was all woods, for roughly 40 miles from any other town. I think now that it probably came off the mountain to eat, or it came down to drink, as the property wasn't all that far from the river. And there's a third option. Northeast Pennsylvania is riddled with coal mines. There are hundreds of miles of mines here that aren't used. Who knows? Maybe these things winter underground. It's a certain temperature all year. I think around 50 degrees. Seems like an almost ideal territory. Very, very few people go down there. It's too dangerous with all the atmosphere and the risk of cave-in. And it's easy to get lost. Very few mind maps even survive today. In all sincerity, I wouldn't wish seeing this thing on my worst enemy. The experience has really changed me, and I'm still terrified. I do my best to try and keep an open mind, but I can't help but wonder, how much other stuff have I laughed at that wanders in the dark? What else out there is real? Thanks. Signed, Anonymous.
What else indeed? Chilling story, and thank you so much for sharing that. Next, a young couple out for a walk. Well, they see something that they just can't explain.
Dear TV, about 10 years ago, on a fall evening, around 7 p.m., my girlfriend, roommate, and I were walking along some decommissioned Washington State train tracks, surrounded by woods on both sides. We all loved exploring little in-between areas, so this wasn't an uncommon event. We were about 5 miles into those tracks and woods. We were just considering heading back since it was getting dark, and none of us had a flashlight. That's when I suddenly got this sensation of almost nausea-inducing dread, and looked at both my friends who were there with me, and I saw that they too were feeling something. Wide-eyed and looking around, I said, "Let's start heading back," and they all nodded in silent agreement. Mind you, we were doing just fine a few seconds ago, and we do this sort of thing all the time, so this sudden onset of fear was unusual, and not something that we were prepared for or used to. Just as we turned around, we all hear a strange sound that almost sounded like quieted thunder. That was coming from what sounded like, well, maybe off in the distance. As we whipped around to see what had made the noise, a large white bird that I think was a white owl flew over our heads silently, flapping its wings, then disappearing behind a tree that was a good 25 feet behind us. We all just looked at each other, trying to make sense of what the hell we had just heard, and started walking briskly back toward civilization. We heard what sounded like twig snapping in the woods behind us, and my girlfriend and I turned around to see what was making the noise. There, peeking from behind the tree that the owl had just flown behind, was what looked like an impossibly tall, ghost-white humanoid shape, with one hand on the tree trunk as it peered at us out from behind it. Before we could get a good look at its face, it quickly retreated back behind the tree out of sight. My girlfriend and I looked at each other and panicked. She opened her mouth to say something, and I said, "Don't talk about it. We just need to walk faster." My roommate looked at us confused and clearly scared by what I'd just said. So I told him we should probably run home at this point, which we did. Now, I've told a few people this story, and no one believes me. What I saw was not the owl that I'd seen earlier. This being had a clear ghost white hand on the tree trunk, a neck and an upper body, and was tall. I'd say at least like 7 feet. Not tall enough to reach the branches of the tree, though. I wish I could have made out the face. It was just so dark that the only reason I could see it was of how white it was. Signed, Alan.
Thanks, Alan, for sending in your story. I would have guessed the creature was a crawler, but with the owl and the shape-shifting, well, I just don't know. Now, another bizarre winged creature is sighted in Utah. What could it have been?
Hello, biker. I would say that around June 2013 in Salina, Utah, I was walking under a street lamp with a friend. He was talking, and I was looking at the stars as we walked. We walked under a street lamp that was also shining light upwards. Plain as day, I then saw a flying humanoid. Head, body, arms, and legs, just like a human, fly above the street lamp about 10 feet from the edge of the asphalt road, probably 30 to 40 feet up off the ground. Flying in the opposite direction as we were walking, this creature was basically traveling south on the west side of the road. The height, I would say, is about the size of an adult human. Its arms, legs, and body were athletic looking, but looked like it hardly had any muscle. It had 5 fingers like us, but only 3 toes, and these toes narrowed down to a point like a cone or a triangle. Its wings seemed to protrude from its shoulders, and the length of each wing was about twice the length of the creature's arms. The wings were narrow and had very little surface area. I didn't see the creature flap these wings to fly. They actually looked a little too small to support its body. Plus, the body was parallel to the ground and was elongated like it was lying down while flying. The weight of the hips, legs, feet should have been sagging towards the ground. It had small hook-like things that came from the creature's leg, and the mid-calf area faced outward. I didn't see any breasts or any kind of genitalia. I don't know what the sex was. Hopefully this thing doesn't reproduce, but I'm sure it does. I haven't told too many people about what I saw that night, and most people that I do tell don't believe me. Although I did run into a guy who had saw one also, and I'd say it was the same species of creature. He was also camping around the Salina, Utah area, and he said it flew down, swooped at him, made a screeching noise. Thanks for reading. Signed, Spencer.
Thank you, Spencer, for sharing that report. This one stumps me as well. And next up, the winged creature sightings continue with this bizarre report from New Mexico.
Hello, biker. I wanted to tell you the story of what I experienced in Tierra Azul, New Mexico. I was 15 at the time, so this would have been in 2005. My cousin and I were the only ones there together. There was a car in front of us when, all of a sudden, I saw this black figure. It kind of looked like a trash bag flying in the wind, but then, as it got closer, it started to look like a runner with its hands in front of it, flat like runners do when they're running, but this thing, it didn't look like a man. The car in front of us swerved, and in the next few seconds, everything slowed down. The creature in front of the car and to the right on the shoulder started coming at our car, and it jumped when it did that. It spread its arms, and then these wings came out. It was over the sides of the car, widthwise from driver to passenger door. Its face was absolutely freaky because, well, it wasn't human at all. And it had beady yellow eyes and 2 fangs. But now, looking back, it reminds me of the Mothman. It didn't have any ears, and its face seemed almost blank. It had no nose at all. It was just eyes and mouth and fangs. These fangs looked to be 3 to 6 inches long, sticking out of its mouth. Its chest had a white V, like it had fur or something, similar to a deer. The legs were weird and kind of looked like goat legs. The height was around 4 to 5 feet tall, and the wings looked like they came out of its sides or rib cage like a glider, but they extended longer than the arms and looked like bat wings, except they were really, really big. My aunt told me that she thinks that my cousin, who witnessed the being with me, saw it again a few years ago. This is her story as told to me. My cousin was checking on her double wide because it wasn't connected to the grid. She told my aunt that she had a weird feeling, so she stayed in her van. Then this thing literally came out of nowhere, and her youngest daughter started screaming and pulling on her headrest from behind her and yelling, "It's going to get us." That's when she looked, and there by her trailer, she said she saw 2 yellow eyes peeking around the tree, looking at them both, and then hiding back again. She said that right away she got out of there. and she said that she thinks that it was the same creature, since her trailer is only a mile from where we saw the winged creature the first time. It would be really strange if she saw it with me all those years ago, and then again 10 years later. Thanks. Signed, Miguel.
Thank you, Miguel. Seeing that thing must have been a terrifying experience. And now, an unforgettable encounter with a strange humanoid on a Wisconsin trail.
Dear Biker, one weekend in October 2024, my friends and I had set out for a camping trip in Lake Kagasa State Park in Staunton, Wisconsin. While finishing up some geocaching on a hiking trail near the outhouses, we encountered something or someone strange. You can enter the trail after crossing the path of another trail that enters the forest. Now, the trail we were on circled a prairie that was surrounded by forest in the middle of the trail. The sun was low in the sky at the time, and it had to have been roughly 6 p.m. The sun was just above the tree line as we started our hike, and as we were at our last geocache of the night, the sun had just gone behind the tree, and it was beginning to get dark. But we could still see without the assistance of flashlights. The forest went silent, and there were no more sounds of bugs around us or birds that had been active all day. It approached us with a whistle, this bone-chilling whistle. Our entire group went silent, and no one said a word until we heard a second whistle. Now, this second whistle was more broken up than the first, and in the slightly tipsy state I was in, I thought it had to be a human whistle, as it wasn't quite perfect. I responded with a pretty stern hello, hoping for an explanation as to why our group got whistled at twice. "I thought you were dogs," a voice said as we rounded the trail. As he passed our group, I noticed that I couldn't make out this person's face. At the time, I chalked it up to nerves and just being distracted. As a group, we'd agreed that while it was a strange encounter, we shouldn't panic, but we took it as a sign to get off that trail. And this is where it gets even more weird. The four of us in the group kept our eyes peeled for anything as we made our way back to the car, when suddenly, this creature, calling it a creature now as it surely wasn't human, just appeared on the edge of the trail closest to the woods, staring blankly out at the field in front of it. That would have been to our right, and in the flattest, driest tone you've ever heard, it said, "Who's that guy?" Everyone in our group kept walking as I answered, "The same guy from earlier?" I assumed it was talking about my friend, who was behind in the group. We had never been so silent on the way back to the car, checking our shoulders and our surroundings constantly. We made it back to our campsite, where we decided that due to the time of day, it would be best to wait and just pack up in the morning. While we were sort of debriefing our experience, I told my friends how in neither encounter I could make out a face. As a female hiker, I just make a point of gathering the facial features of anyone I encounter on the trail, just in case. But no one in our group could identify a face. And in our own ways, we described how the face of this thing wasn't human. It seemed to almost have a blurred effect over where its face should have been. All of us had seen exactly the same thing. You could tell where the eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, but there was just none that you could make out on this creature. Because it whistled and was unidentifiable, we are convinced that we encountered a skinwalker. Skinwalkers just aren't that relevant in the area of Wisconsin. It was a long night at the campsite with the impending feeling of being watched. Now, I'm spiritually inclined and feel that I took the necessary steps to protect our campsite for a secure night's sleep. But I have had strange encounters ever since, and I'm willing to explain those encounters I've had since that night if asked. Signed, Bree.
Thanks, Bree. I hope you eventually find peace from the strange encounters. Now, I personally don't believe that what you encountered was a skinwalker. Your sighting just doesn't line up with that particular lore. I think you encountered a being that could be extraterrestrial, or maybe even interdimensional in nature. Now, I'm not sure that puts your mind at ease, though. Well, and that's it. All the true cryptid encounter stories and reports that I have for you tonight. I'd love to hear your thoughts and theories about these down in the comments below, but please keep it respectful to the witnesses. And if you have an unexplained encounter or a strange experience that you want to share, just send it to the email address in the description, and well, your story may just wind up in a future video. Anyways, thank you so very much for taking this strange ride to cryptid country with me. I really appreciate it. And until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and well, I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker out.